Okay, I think maybe once I've got my family finally out of the room, we can all get started. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to do this, Steve and Jeff. And I hope that we'll manage to cover some of the history of design research at the Open University, because 50 years is a long time. And the surprising thing is that people are still saying design is a new field and it's emerging and still finding its feet. And I think it's 50 years. That's actually a long, long time going through the entire history of the Open University. But we should probably kick off by introducing ourselves. So maybe I'll start. I'm Claudia Eckhardt. I'm a professor of design at the Open University. I've got a long history as the Open University from my perspective. I was an Open University PhD student in the 1990s, supervised by Jeff and Nigel, when I had a tiny baby who came along to various meetings, as it is with the Open University quite often. Then I spent about 10 years in Cambridge in the Engineering Design Center, and then came back to the Open University. And my research interest is mainly on the design processes of complex systems. So most of my work is on engineering design, some of it is on architecture, and I have a very long-standing interest in fashion design and sustainable fashion. So my comments often come from many different angles. Jeff, maybe you go next, since you've been at the OU for longest.
Yes, I joined the OU in 1981 as a research fellow, during the intermediate time, I have become Professor of Complexity Science and Design, which to my mind is about the most wonderful combination of things you could possibly have.
Well, that's some enthusiasm for design research, Jeff. Steve, do you want to go next?
That was nice and brief. I actually joined the university in 1974, but I didn't join design. I joined social sciences and what was then the Newtown Study Unit, which was run by Ray Thomas in social sciences. And I defected to technology and design in 1987. So I'm one of those people who felt drawn towards design when I was actually in another part of the university. And I think we might go into that a little bit later on. I eventually sort of wheedled my way up the system and ended up as Professor of Transport Strategy at the OU. And I'm now Emeritus Professor of Transport Strategy and still dabbling around a fair bit. Is that adequate, Claudia?
It is. So what drew you to design, Steve?
Ah, that's interesting. It was a mixture of things. It was when I joined social sciences, I was the one and only PhD student, full-time PhD student over in social sciences. I was doing my PhD on the transport and land use design of Britain's new towns. And basically, there was nobody else in social sciences doing anything vaguely related to what I was interested in. But there was the energy research group over in technology, which was positioned within, I think at that time it was separate from design, but a big overlap. And later it became now an energy environment research unit incorporated within design. And I got to know Steve Cousins particularly well. Also Andy Brown, who was a research student at the time doing some bicycle research stuff. And of course, Pete Chapman, or whatever he wants to have him, he kept changing his names over the years. And got to know that group out in the wasteland of the huts over the far corner of the Open University. And I found I actually had an awful lot in common with them. I was quite fascinated by this multidisciplinary group, which approached things from all sorts of different angles, and I found was incredibly stimulating. Yeah, that was it. I can tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later if you like, but that's what really interested me. So almost from the beginning, and for the first 10 years at the OU,
Stephen,
before I came anywhere near it, I was interested in that. Sorry.
You say, do I remember him? When did I meet him?
Did
Okay, I think everybody is muted again. What did you think that design was at the time?
It's interesting. At that time, I didn't have any particular image of what design was. I didn't have any preconceptions because I had not really bumped into designers as such. So what I bumped into was actually the Energy Research Group, which had a wide mix of people in it. You know, Steve, you had engineers in it. You had Steve Cousins, who was talking to me about biological trophic levels and how that proved the Loch Ness Monster couldn't exist. We could go into that a little bit later, if you like, about the trophic ecosystem of Loch Ness. It was all part. I actually found the OU an interesting melee at that time, and the researchers were. There was a lot of people bubbling around frantically, getting course units written and production done in the sort of mid to late 70s. But there were a few people who were actually really intent on the research side of things. And so I sort of made those links with the more in order to get some good intellectual stimulation going. And I found over in the design side, there was some really quite wonderful weirdos. Simple as that. And I related to them so strongly, I built my entire career out the OU in consequence.
So has anything changed in that respect?
You came along a little bit later. Robin might want to jump in here, but Jeff, you came in a little bit later, so I'm not quite sure whether you would have had that sort of pioneering image knocking around still then.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, when I joined the university, we had our fair share of people who were totally and utterly bonkers, and that was absolutely wonderful. That I've actually made a note just off the top of my head of people. So when I came here, Lionel March had taken over from Chris Jones, and there were characters like George Steiny, who was Shape Grammar Man. There was Phil Stedman, who was a wonderful colleague, did work on Vermeer's camera and stuff like that. There was Joe Rooney, who did robotics. There was Ray Matella, who had an ability to spend money on computers like I've never seen in the universe.
We'll come back to that in a bit.
There was Ramesh Krishnamurti, who was also Shape Grammar. So of course there was Chris Earle was here then, before he went off to the west of England and Newcastle. There was also the absolutely wonderful Katherine Cook, who was she was absolutely amazing. She was a scholar of Russian and design. And have I left anybody out? Well, of course, there was Nigel and Robin and Godfrey and Dave Elliott and Stephen and lots of other great people too. It was a really terrific, exciting place to be. And as Stephen said, everybody had some weird interest in something or other, which nothing at face value would be connected to anything else, and yet in retrospect, everything was highly connected to everything else. It was design.
Yeah, and I found I was sort of ending up working with people I would not normally have associated with. Over in social sciences, you had very strict discipline boundaries. And you had a small group of people who were referred to as being in the undisciplined area, of which Ray Thomas and I were two of them. We were officially undisciplined. I just loved that term. It's like when we had a pro-vice chancellor, Naomi Mackintosh, and we always giggled saying, oh, there's PVC Mackintosh going around, you know. But things like that were happening. But the interdisciplinarity and the way in which you could work with people from a totally different perspective, totally different skill set and understanding, and they would tolerate you and your ignorance, your bumbling around in their discipline area, and yet finding that there was something you could contribute from your understandings and they could, and together you ended up with this combined understanding which was so much richer than actually if you'd stuck within your disciplinary silo. And that was the thing that I actually found quite exciting about design and rather boring about social sciences. And
what sort of disciplines did people come from in design at the time?
Oh, good. Well, Jeff, you've mentioned quite a few of them, but there were quite a few people with a sort of a social sciences understanding as well, and a few who quite like the sort of business school side of things before there ever was a business school. So Dave Walker was a clear example of that, and he actually moved in to do an awful lot of work in design management, and actually resulted in a sort of treading on the toes of the new business school, because we actually developed a lot of understanding and stuff and courses, and indeed quite a large portfolio of research, which could quite easily have been positioned within the business school. Well enough, the business schools actually developed quite an interesting interdisciplinary melee as well. It is actually an unusual business school compared to UK as a whole, and we're an unusual design department.
But it's an interesting question, Claudia, that to answer it, I will quote Simon Nicholson. Simon Nicholson was a lecturer in design when I came. He was the son of Ben Nicholson. And he once said to me quite contemptuously that a lot of the people in design were mathematicians. And of course, since I'm a mathematician, he said that to my face without realizing it. But actually, I mean, again, going through well, you have to understand that at that time, the discipline or the design had these emerging disciplines. So there was the one that I was associated with was called the Centre for Configurational Studies. There was something called Design Policy, which Robin and I think Stephen and others were in. And then there was, I forget what it was called, but it was the Energy Research Unit, which was Godfrey. I have to say that in retrospect, I'm very proud of being with that group, because they were absolutely visionary 30, 40 years ago, foreseeing climate change and the need for sustainability. But out of the group I mentioned, Lionel, I'm not quite sure. I think Lionel did have a background in mathematics and architecture. Phil Stedman was an architect. George Steiny, I think, was an engineer. Joe Rooney was a roboticist. Katherine, as I've said, was a kind of Russian scholar. Chris, I think, had a background in mathematics, and I think so did Ramesh. So we were quite mathematical on our side, and you can speak for the others, Stephen, I guess, more from the design side.
Oh yes, well, if we think about, well, Robin, who's remaining appropriately silent, so we've got the sort of engineering background, but there was within the design innovation group, we actually had quite a mixture of interesting understandings. I don't know where half the people came from. In a way, it didn't really matter. It's the contribution that you made. I sort of say I was drawn towards design. There was a sort of element that pushed me, and that they ran out of money for me in social sciences. So I started doing other oddments and did a bit of contract work and did a fair bit of work with Robin. And Robin was very good, and actually we had a research project coming up, and he got me to be a research fellow on that funded project. I have the celebration of my actually joining design, which was in, I think, 1987, was Jeff kindly fire damaged my office in Wimpy 3 the day before I was due to join. A little matter, mind you, he also burnt the creche down next door, but that was a fairly minor matter. We eventually got Wimpy 3 habitable again, but for a good while I had to I was a bit of a squatter in Dave Walker's office for a while, and it was quite an interesting experience. It's something to do with, I think they called it mainframe computer. I think you have one of those things knocking around here, didn't you, Jeff?
Well, we did indeed. That this was something that Lionel and Ray had got. They must have got a whole bunch of money from somewhere, because they had a VAX computer suite. Goodness, this in 1980 odd, and it was a wonderful machine. I think it's a bit of a slander to say that I burnt it down. That
of course it's slander. I just had to do that to goad you.
Yes, indeed. But in fact, what happened was that some part of it overheated, and it did indeed burn down the creche next door. So it was good news for them, because they got a new building.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it was not such bad news for us, because we got new computers and stuff like that, although it was hugely disruptive. This was the Great Fire of 1987, I think.
Yeah.
And that as I say, disrupted our work, but not too badly. Goodness, what a memory.
Maybe you managed to retrieve a lot of the data off the huge platter hard disks.
It was great. That, I mean, it happened, I think, on a Sunday evening, and so I got in quite quickly, but the fire chief kind of said to me something or other, and I can't remember what I said, but anyway, he told the papers that I had said that I had lost my life's work. So I was getting letters from dear old ladies saying that they would pray for me, that I would recover. And I was able to reply to them that their prayers had been successful, because we lost no data at all. So everybody was happy about that. But yeah, it was very disruptive. I'm glad to see you, Robin, because going back to the question about what did people do before they joined the OU, I think you worked with Waddington before you came to the OU.
That's right, in Buffalo State University of New York at Buffalo.
Yeah,
he was running not to do with genetics and so on, but about a futures course, and I got somehow recruited to teach on that course. That was very.
We maybe moved from the physical fire to how Open University design research set the world on fire. So what do you think its contribution was?
It's had its moments, Claudia, and it certainly has been hot, tough stuff from time to time, and I think remains hot stuff in my view.
I think actually a lot of the stuff we were pioneering was way ahead of its time. Yeah. You know, it's the in terms of research, which was stuck still very much in the 70s and 80s in disciplinary silos. We were actually doing what you might say more constructivist stuff, of actually saying that if you blend a series of disciplinary perspectives, without being disrespectful to the disciplines, you can actually get working together. And in a way, it goes back to the original structuring of the Faculty of Technology, where you had your traditional departments, and then you had these two departments, systems and design, which were all about how you actually integrate disciplinary perspectives around a common approach. And systems had theirs, and design we had ours, and it just showed the value of that sort of approach. And it was sometimes quite awkward and difficult getting publications. I think we could say that, because we actually did things that reviewers found didn't quite fit into their boxes as neatly as they would like, or even funders would find that to be a difficulty. And today, you know, eventually it became all the rage and is now expected. But also the sheer topics that were being developed. Certainly, the sustainability agenda may have had different labels associated with it, but that was certainly being developed. Certainly, the stuff that Dave Elliott and Godfrey Boyle and equally Robin were doing in the 70s. now the accepted wisdom and accepted approach. And I'd hope that we're actually continuing to do that and forge new routes through to the future and keep ahead of the wave.
I mean, Stephen's being very modest. I mean, he was an absolute key person in a number of research projects that the Design Innovation Group did from the late 1980s onwards. I mean, we did this study about the commercial returns on investment in design, for example, which demonstrated very, very clearly that using professional designers in companies was a worthwhile thing for business to do. And this was taken up, this was kind of something that the Design Council obviously welcomed and promoted very heavily, and went to the Department of Trade and Industry and so on. So that was one. And then there was, we went on to look at the green products and whether they were worth developing, and again appeared to show that they were worth developing from a kind of commercial point of view. And then there was that really, I think, very pioneering study that Steve, I think he led it really, about the relative impacts of face-to-face versus distance learning.
Oh, that one. Well, I'm not quite sure whether I led that, but it was you, me, Sally Kerr played a big role in that, and then Sally took that forward, and that's because that then became the teach side of things. Yes, it and showed the environmental benefits of distance teaching. That is just so contemporary at the moment as we talk to each other on Zoom, to say the least.
Yeah. Meanwhile, of course, Steve was doing all his transport research as well,
Well, but the thing is that linked in very well with design, and that was the thing that I found was really interesting, because the first project that I did with you, Robin, was on the case study of, asking the question, why did the advanced passenger train fail? And that was initially for coursework. It was a bit of contract work we started with. It was actually before I joined the department, whatever we want to call it these days. But it then got turned into research papers and eventually became a book that was published. But the interesting thing about that, at the core of it, was a clash of design cultures within a particular institution, British Rail as it was then. And it was actually applying a design analysis that actually formed the basis of getting a proper understanding. And I think the thing that was really interesting from that was that we then got further research grants from British Rail Research. I think we had 2 or 3 grants that emerged out of that, because they then came to recognize the value of our integrative design-focused approach, which could provide much more nuanced understandings to where they were than the traditional engineering research focus, which they had been employing up to then and found in the traditional mechanical engineering departments of other universities. And I think that's what design has actually done through to today, because even now with the work I'm doing with Matt Cook and Miguel Valdez, with people like Western Power Distribution and the companies developing wireless recharging infrastructure for electric vehicles, is that we're providing the socio-technical studies, and they're beginning to realize actually there's an interesting interdisciplinary focus, which is, although we may not call it design thinking, is actually very much in our DNA and is rooted in that. And they really welcome the different perspectives and understandings and the way that can actually fit in to their businesses and their understanding in fast-moving areas, responding to the latest initiatives in the sustainability agenda. So that sort of skill, which you helped imbibe in me in the 1980s, Robin, I'm sort of passing on, or we are passing on to younger researchers today, and realizing how important it is. And I think that is the long-term benefit of design from years ago, is actually helping to propel design forward in the 2020s.
So Jeff, what was, from your perspective, the big impact of design research from the Open University? Because your research was somewhat different to what Steve described.
Mm. Yes, I was just thinking, actually, in fact, although my background isn't in design, I did actually have, I did actually work with Bruce Archer's group at Royal College of Art a long time before I joined the OU. Again, applying sort of mathematical ideas to design. And I guess for me, when I came to the OU, I didn't know much about design as such, but like Steve says, it's you know, you have design 101 very quickly, and then you get XYZ 101 of everything. And if you're interdisciplinary, that's absolutely great. So in my world, in complex systems, nobody knows everything, and so everybody is willing to give you their own subject 101 very quickly without thinking you're a total and utter idiot, and you can learn a lot of stuff that way. But I was just thinking that perhaps two things really. One is that I really did appreciate the way that the great founding fathers of our design discipline took on the challenge of making design explicit, so it could be taught at a distance, and what they abstracted was absolutely right. I mean, design as a human process, they got it absolutely right in my view, and it's something that I learned, and it's with me all the time. But perhaps to fast forward a bit, Claudia, it might be interesting to talk about designing for the 21st century, which was a highlight, I think, for us at the OU and for the whole of the UK design community. So for those who don't know, perhaps you'd like to tell us, Claudia, perhaps you'd like to summarize what happened.
That was an initiative by the government in the early 2000s, where I think they funded 20 different networks of people who looked at different aspects of design, and that brought a weird and wonderful combination of people together. So I was part of Jeff's network on complexity, which had all sorts of researchers who were interested in complexity and people from industry, and really, really interesting discussions about the nature of complexity and the definition of complexity. That's also where I met Theo and Katharina, who were sort of the young helpers of that network at the time. And I was also part of a network on sustainable fashion, which looked forwards into the future in the way very few other communities did. And the things that they were discussing in 2002 are sort of very slowly emerging, like electrics in textiles. Now, of course, we've got electrically heated gloves and things like that, but it was really, really looking forwards and very, very visionary. And these networks didn't get a vast amount of money. I think it was about £50,000, but I think the amount of networking that it generated for the community was phenomenal. And that was really the time when the government appreciated design and really valued design as such. In the meantime, it seems to have decided a bit that it has funded design in the 1990s and early 2000s, and there's no more need to fund anything. And they just close things down, but that's another story.
Yeah. The other thing is about the approach of design from a research point of view is we do have a bit of an identity challenge. And I think and that is always something that carries on and on and on. Although you do get organizations valuing our approach, it always crops up again that it's what is this research animal that's done within design at the OU? And I think one of the key things that happened to help us with that Well, strange enough, the old original REF, the research excellence, the research RAE, research assessment exercise, which is when Nigel got us for the very first of those. I'm trying to remember when the first one was. I think it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Nigel insisted that we actually went in for the design unit of assessment, and we didn't break up our research into our disciplinary areas and go in for a mixture of disciplinary submissions. We went in together as design, even though everybody else going in for design were traditional university or college schools of design who did the usual sort of stuff of teaching students and having end of year exhibitions and stuff like that. And we had to make a case that we had a valid, ours was a valid contribution to design research in that area. We put and Nigel managed that extremely well, together with references across to other disciplinary areas. And perhaps much to the amazement of the design community, we ended up being right up towards the top of that group. It wasn't the best funded group. We could have gone into much better funded units of assessment, but mind you, we hardly got any of the money. The money went to the university and disappeared into a wonderful black hole somewhere, and it still does. But I do remember, I think it was a couple of assessment exercises later, it was Peter Lloyd and myself were actually heading up the submission that particular year. We're still waiting for the present one to come through. And I remember when we went to, I think it was Bridget in the Beryl Lecture Theatre, who refused to tell everybody in advance, and it was just flashed up on the screen, each unit of assessment and where everybody got positioned on this. So the figures turned up, and there was Peter and I looking roughly at the middle area, thinking, where on earth are we? Are we somewhere off the bottom of the screen there? And we didn't even think of looking up to the very top. And there we were, right at the very top of the design unit of assessment. And so that is one area in research. Now we've slipped a bit since then, and others have learned how to play the game a bit more and be a bit more interdisciplinary in design. But that just showed where we are. Let's see what happens for the 2021 REF assessment. But I think we're probably going to do quite well in that as well. Though unfortunately, oldies like Robin and I aren't allowed to take part in it anymore. But I think that was an important thing on the research side, was to get ourselves recognised nationally in that jamboree that occurs every 7 years or so. Sorry, Jeff.
Well, I was going to say that the design group, under whatever name it is, has always been very successful. And I think there was a period where, I'm not quite sure how to express this, but where let's say the pioneers like Nigel and Phil and Robin and you and so on, were beginning to leave the university in retirement. Yeah. And the next generation was coming up, which is most of the people who are here. And I think what is happening is that the department or the group has kind of has evolved into whatever it is now, which I personally think is very healthy. And so let's hope that the outcome of the next REF is as good as all the previous ones. And I think we have good reason to hope it will be. So I think it's great to see that kind of continuity and the evolution in the design. And the group is, I think, as strong in research as it ever was. It's doing marvelous things.
But I think this need to define ourselves is something that I think is very characteristic of design, that it's an evolving thing and that you never can kind of nail it down. And I think every Open University generation will need to define it again for itself. And I think the design community at large also is trying to define itself and position itself and understand what design is, since design is sort of a bit moving under our feet and we are trying to catch up and understand what it's about. Because I think it has never got quite established as a field with clear boundaries the way that other people have, and that we still have a lot of researchers who could also be somewhere else, and we are essentially a design group because we want to be a design group, even though individuals could go off into architecture or engineering or business or something else, and that we still are sort of fighting for our members and fighting for the coherence of the story that we're trying to tell, and in a way have to keep on reinventing ourselves. And I think that's in some ways is something quite positive, that it is in a sense vigorous because it has to define itself. But it's also the big challenge about design as a field, that it can't quite define itself and can't quite define its boundaries and its unique expertise.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that it's interesting the way you put it, because of course we're representative of many design disciplines. So, for example, your work in clothing and so on, and also you work in helicopters and and people are designing houses or wind turbines and so on. And so as a group, we've always been sort of transdisciplinary over the design disciplines. And so, way back in the 80s, when we had the blockbuster computer-aided design course, and one of the things that was so obvious there was that computer-aided design has the same story in all the design disciplines, from electronics through architecture, through mechanical engineering, through clothes, etc., etc. It's all the same thing. So I think that what the group has done is to establish a very strong story. There is a very strong understanding of design, and I think we really shouldn't be afraid of being evangelical. I mean, everybody here, you're in the right place. This is, if you've got to be anywhere in the intellectual world, this is it. And not just because this is our tribe, but much more than that, because I think the design community really has a huge amount to contribute to society. I mean, the designers are the people who imagine the future. They imagine things that don't exist. They bring new things into being. They have methods for solving problems and dealing with complexity. So, as I say, for me, design is the main event, and then there's many different ways you can look at it, like a kaleidoscope.
I think maybe to draw the formal part of this discussion to a conclusion, maybe we should talk about where we think that design research will go in the future. So where do you think it will go, Steve? What still needs to be done? What can we do? What should we do?
It's interesting. I'm still dabbling a fair bit with research with the group and people around here. It's interesting. A phrase I've started using recently in some of the publications, some of the research I'm doing, is transformative design. It's where you don't just tinker with the performance of products, services, or systems, but are actually looking at a process that leads to a transformation in performance, be it in quality, price, technical performance, user satisfaction, or quite crucially these days, environmental sustainability. And that's what's got me working a fair bit in local transport and energy innovation developments in Milton Keynes, because I can see some of the becoming quite hands-on in some respects, working with projects on that I have no technical expertise in at all, like autonomous vehicles, the Starship robots that go running around here, the technicalities of electric charging systems, but in which I'm able to apply my skills of working with people from a wide variety of backgrounds, just like I have been doing for the last 30 or so years of people within design. And it's I think the design is sort of moving up a level to actually produce, you know, you've got to produce massive improvements in sustainability and to get moving onto a transformative trajectory. And I think it's that sort of agenda that may be the one that we need to start addressing, and we already are addressing within our group, but are aware that that is going to have some really big challenges over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. I think the notion of transformative design is very fundamental. That I mean, I talk about designing the future and designing policy. That I mean, we live in a world where we are literally designing our future, not just the infrastructure, but in fact the social structure. And generally speaking, it's not done terribly well, mostly because it's not done in a designerly way. But if these problems were approached as design problems, in my view, they would be much better understood, that the possibility would be better understood, the planning and the transitions would be better understood, which is why I think that our subject to design is so absolutely fundamental to the future.
I think I would agree with this as well, that it's the transformation and the response to the challenges that we are facing that design really will need to address and will have to come into the forefront. I think what I also find interesting is that this combination of needing to evolve a system and needing to have a radical change, because on the one hand we know that things have to be really, really different soon, otherwise we're just not going to have a planet on which we're living. On the other hand, we're resource constrained and we have to sort of slowly work our way towards state we want to be, making use of what we've got, because we can't cope with too many changes at once. And I find that's a very interesting tension at the heart of design, this sort of combination of the evolving and the radical changes and the methodologies and the tools we need to actually implement that in practice.
Perhaps I could just say one thing as we're coming to the end, Claudia, is that one of the glories of our group is the inseparability of teaching and research. And so it's always been like that. So, you know, going back to the late 70s and the 80s, you know, the design research question was, what is design and how do we teach it? And what the guys did was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, so all of us find that when we're doing our teaching, we're on the frontiers of research. And when we're doing our research, we bring stuff in from the teaching. And I think this is one of the marvelous things about both the Open University and the design group within the university.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a very good point to end. Should we open this to people to ask us questions or contribute or make suggestions?
Yeah. People can put questions in chat, I presume, or unmute, but it can be a bit difficult when a lot of people unmute simultaneously.
We seem to have been crystal clear and resolved everything about the history of design, which is interesting. I think what we talked about very little about is the sort of shape grammar, structural and theoretical work that also has been going on at the OU for a very long time. Because I think we always had this tension between addressing the challenges of the world and understanding the sort of theoretical underpinnings of design. And I think that was a very enriching combination as well.
Yes, actually, Claudia, that's a strand that we haven't mentioned. But again, in the department, there's always been a great interest in artificial intelligence and the possibility of automated design. So the shape grammars were to do with making a representation for that. and that was done by George Steiny and Ramesh Krishnamurti. I think Chris O was involved in that, and Easton continues that research. And so even today, I would say we still are one of the departments that knows a lot about AI in design.
Yeah.
We seem to have Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It was actually just a comment you made, Jeff. I just wanted to pick up on it and ask a bit more. You talked about designing the future in organizations, or particularly with reference to designing policy, and how much of this isn't design, or people are not designing. Why do you think that is still persisting? Why do you think that we are still, I mean, what are the other approaches, if you like, mindsets, or what are the blockers? What are the things that are not allowing this to take place, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there still is a perception that design is about colored pencils and go faster stripes and stuff. There is also, because of the heterogeneity of design, so people can understand that somebody designed their BMW and they can be very grateful for that, or that somebody designed their house, but they won't see it from a design perspective. So the approach of the designer is to try to understand what's wanted, to try to understand the constraints, the resources available, to try to generate solutions, to evaluate them, and all that kind of stuff. And then this co-evolution between the what you think you want and what you think you can have, which designers understand, but the general public don't. So they think problem solving is like solving mathematics. So 3 minus 2 equals 1, and so the understanding that the problem evolves, the perception of it evolves, that when we're solving problems, we're learning, we're collecting information. These are just ordinary stuff for designers. That's the design process, which other people are not explicitly familiar with. And I think, again, going back to my evangelical stance, I think it's part of our job is to explain that to people, and then people can recognize it when you tell them this, because everyone's a designer. I think we've got Theo in the audience, so this is his mantra, which I absolutely agree with. So almost every human being has experience designing something, even if it's only shifting the furniture around, and they know the process. And so people will resonate to that. I think a lot of what we do in design is done under the context of so-called management, but it's not done the same way, and it's not done so well because it's not based upon these fundamental creative principles. So yeah, I do think if we're going to solve the problems of the future, they will be solved through taking a designerly approach.
But I think it's also our challenge as a community, in a way, to get ownership back of design from the management community, because you can't design things without an understanding of the subject matter and the technical understanding that's behind this. And I think that's also one of the big challenges for the design communities.
That relates to the question that Katherine has put up, because she was asking about interdisciplinarity as a core aspect. And I quite like the question, how do we incorporate interdisciplinarity into design teaching in the future? I think I can't really answer from the teaching point of view. But I think some of the things we've been talking about from the research side, for example, one of the interesting things is that there are very strong institutional barriers. And this was the thing I found when I did that original study on the advanced passenger train, where people think in particular ways. And you actually have to have different sort of structures to cope with that. One thing I found quite interesting, I'm doing transport studies with Milton Keynes Council, and it's interesting, they're all transport studies, they're all transport innovation studies, but they are not managed by the transport department in Milton Keynes Council. They have set up a special unit, which is actually a transport innovation department. where they have people who actually understand interdisciplinarity. So they approach things outside of a traffic engineer's mindset. And I think that is part of the reason why Milton Keynes has so many interesting and remarkably successful transport innovations that have gone through in the last 5 or 6 years, because they've actually put in a structure and people that think in an interdisciplinary way. And I think that could be, that may actually be the future, is building alliances with organizations that actually operate in a designly manner, even if they may not think of themselves as being designers.
Yeah, following on from that and answering your question directly, Katrina, I think the best way that we can incorporate interdisciplinarity into our teaching is to keep talking to each other and to keep learning from each other. So one of the things that we've lost to a greater or lesser extent in the pandemic is the fact we don't have so many water cooler moments or or coffee moments and stuff. And so on the one hand, that's great because we can all hide away at home and get stuff done. On the other hand, I don't know about the rest of you, but I really miss those conversations in the corridor that, where you can lose a whole afternoon just passing somebody.
Or Jeff Johnson grabs hold of me and says, don't you want to co-supervise this complexity student with mine? And I did. I learned an immense amount. I learned new angles to work at. And then Claudia grabbed me and said, I've got this student who wants to do a clothing design PhD. Can't you be co-supervisor with me? Totally different fields running off one way or the other at the same time. And boy, did I learn a lot from both of those.
Yeah, I think so. So the answer to the question is that we have to glory in our heterogeneity, that we are heterogeneous, and it's a great thing, and we should encourage it in others. And Stephen has said that there are institutional boundaries, but in fact they're not severe, and it's possible to break them down or to ignore them.
Well, in teaching and in academia, but when we start working with practitioners, I think we still find those boundaries are pretty rigid.
And funding councils.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
In response to the question about societal challenges, I think that something I've thought about is the UN Sustainability Goals, and if you look at each one of those, you can address that from a design perspective. That they are all looking at particular systems, and the question is how we can address those systems and the problems in them. And so I would say that a design approach is applicable to all of them. Of course, I believe a design approach is essential to all of them, but I'm a bit extreme.
Emma, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I wanted to pick up on, I guess, this notion of what all of you've learned over the time about perhaps being more radical interrupters. There's a sort of sense, I suppose, of the climate emergency and the need to transition, to transform, to be transformative, which to me suggests that, of course, there is that argument for evolution, but there's also that notion of more radical steps. And I just wondered, from the history of what you've done at the OU, whether there's lessons to be learned about how to be radical and how to be radical well and effectively.
I wouldn't dismiss evolutionary approaches, Emma, but I think in the sort of is that an important thing is identifying the trajectory of those evolutionary approaches. You often need staged approaches simply because ideas, concepts, approaches will not actually be taken any further forward if there's no way of working between A and B. So you need stages that run in between. So what you need to do is to have the vision that you've got evolutionary approaches which will actually deliver a benefit at each stage as it goes forward. It's almost it is Darwinian evolution that you end up at the end with a transformation if you can actually get that trajectory going. But the difference between biological evolution and design evolution is design is actually a purposeful process, and that you do have an eventual outcome in mind. It may not be a fixed outcome, but it may be one that is actually, and one that you can define precisely at the moment. But as you work along that evolutionary trajectory, it may split off one way, away, split off another as further things change. But you're still moving on towards that more sustainable and better future. The danger with some small incremental approaches is that they don't go far enough, and they sort of peter out after a while. So it's actually having a transformative, disruptive mindset, but recognizing that it may take smaller steps to get there.
Yeah, I'd say that's interesting between evolution and disruption. I'm just thinking that one element of design which is never finished is town planning, so that we're always designing and redesigning our environment. As I say, it's never finished, and it's made up of small projects and big projects, and some are evolutionary, and some, like the creation of Milton Keynes, are completely disruptive and discontinuous. And I suppose for us in the design group that we should value both the big and the small. So some people make breakthroughs which are good but relatively small, and some people will maybe solve the problems of the age, like climate change, or make contributions to it.
I think a lot of the time the challenging question is how we can achieve our goals with the least amount of changes, and that it's change as little as possible and as much as necessary. So the change or innovation themselves are not things that are positive in their own right. They are serving a goal. And if they achieve the goal, then it's fantastic. And if they don't, then we shouldn't change things for the sake of changing them, including OU administrative processes.
Please, don't go there. Don't go there.
No. I was going to give the word to Theo.
Okay.
Did Michael put a hand?
Your voice is inclusive. Sorry, there is a feedback because we have two computers.
If you've got two computers next to each other, you'll get awful feedback.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was planning to ask one question, but Claudia, you make me think maybe I should ask another question. Well, my original question was quite broad, and I really honestly wanted to hear your view about what should be the role of our design, group design school in society in general. What do you see that we should be? Our vision for the future, what should be our role, so that was my original question. But Claudia, you make me think that maybe we need to think also what's our role as a design group within the university, and what do you think that should be our role within our university, and how transformative we can be on the way that university operates, given our kind of background and interests and expertise. So,
I'll pick up on that, Theo. And it's interesting you kind of asking us what's the future of the design group. I'm sure we've got views on that, but really the future of the design group is in the hands of the people whose pictures are not showing on my screen anyway. That I would say to everybody, that this is your future, and have the confidence to take it where it goes. So I guess at our stage we're much better at looking backwards rather than forwards, although some of us still have some view of the future. As far as the design group goes in the university, I mean, I think, again, I go back to this evangelical view that we perhaps, I think in the university, a lot of people do have a good understanding of design, which is great, but a lot of people don't. And So perhaps if we could communicate better in the university what design is all about, and have some kind of coherent story that we can promote, this would be a good thing.
Maybe it's also that we need to try to bring out that design is the ultimate synthesizing discipline.
Absolutely.
That it pulls on everything,
Yeah.
it brings in whatever is required to come up with a solution for whatever is needed. It finds the needs and then pulls in what it requires in order to meet those needs. And maybe that's something that we ought to get better at articulating it, because I think in a way design in its own right doesn't have an agenda. It looks at the needs of a particular situation, tries to listen to the stakeholders in it, synthesize it, pull in the knowledge that's required, and propose the changes. Whereas many of the other disciplines in the university, I think, have got a particular agenda or a particular angle. And in a way, that neutrality of design would be a huge asset, which we could try to communicate. Whether we listen to is another matter.
Let's see what we've got an opportunity emerging now. I'd be very interested to see where, I can't remember when the results of the RAE are coming out, but it's fairly soon, isn't it?
In March, I think.
Yes, that's right. You mean this month?
This month, yeah.
So we may have an opportunity there for being a little bit evangelical, folks. Oh, May. Katrina's written May. 10th of May. Oh, that's great. That's my birthday. Excellent.
Claudia, perhaps you could encourage everybody to switch their cameras on so that we can be more friendly.
Yes. Assuming the bandwidth can allow it.
That's better. It's nice to see everyone.
Yes. I love it. We get both slightly overlapping backgrounds with Katrina and Theo. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Everybody's got embarrassed now. We can see them.
Yeah, I wonder what others have to say about their experience of design research at the OU or outside the OU.
Yeah.
Are you asking the audience, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh. I found the environment, I have to say, liberating when I the OU, and I don't know who is in the audience here, but so it's, I don't want to be too, and we record the session as well. So, but the in previous institutions there was much more constraints and restrictions on, and that has to do also with interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, all the subjects that you discussed. There is a sense of freedom that we have, which we need to appreciate, because it creates a fruitful environment, a fertile environment for innovation, I think. And I found it liberating, to be honest. And that you could, I remember you mentioned the Design for the 21st Century project, and that was quite instrumental for my, well, I met Claudia, and it was incredible. Yeah, indeed, meeting. It was a beautiful period. But also it was indirectly funded a project which was quite important for me. It was a neurological study of design, and that was quite very well back before we have more studies in fMRI research, and I think and it was because of the OU. It was because of Jeff, and mainly because of Jeff, but Jeff within the context of OU as well. So that is, so I have to say that that was really empowering.
Yeah, I think a couple of things about the OU, that strangely, although everything's impossible, in some other way, everything is possible. That the OU will strangle you if you're not careful, but it has so many opportunities to do things that you couldn't do elsewhere. It's a wonderful environment. And the other thing I was going to say, that when I came to the university in the 80s, I remember a tremendous sense of fun, particularly people like Phil Steadman. It was just such fun to think about all these things and do all these weird things. So, you know, Phil making a model of Vermeer's camera of his room, and there was people building windmills that didn't Dirk Taylor and Godfrey build windmills in the early days of all sorts of weird and wonderful design. And something I'd forgotten about was that we had a silk screen printing room at one time that was run by Sally Boyle, and it was a great facility. That it was like being in an old-fashioned art school, really.
Yeah, there's a mixture of things like that, but I think also mentoring is very important. Now, I do consider that I was very strongly mentored by Robin, and Robin found opportunities for me to actually develop, move into my research, pick up new areas and develop them, and give me the space to run with it. So I think there's something important within the group is actually the collegiate thing of helping and developing each other. And in our Zoom and Teams world at the moment, it is perhaps rather easy to withdraw into our own little bits of what we have actually got to get done, and perhaps we should be actually quite a little bit more careful about finding opportunities and ways in the new ways of working. Hooray! Let's have that phrase of actually keeping that encouragement. It's not just a general encouragement, it's actually where some perhaps of the senior staff can actually help open doors and provide opportunities and provide the space for less experienced people to actually get into research, because you certainly getting into actually doing bits of research publications and so forth is actually quite a difficult thing to do when you're in such a teaching focused institution. And that was actually important for me in the past, in the blend of the two that I was able to put together. But we should try, you know, it's not just the water cooler bits which are actually important, and that's part of it, but it's actually little subgroups that actually help get little groups of people together and help move you forward. Sorry, that's a bit vague, but I think it's actually extremely important.
I was just going to say, Steve, that I learned as much from you as you might have done from me.
Yeah, well, that's it. It was symbiotic. Yeah, it was great.
I was going to say that we have collectively a new research challenge in the group, which has been generated by the next generation, which is the new design degree. So it's a research question. How can we create the best design degree in the universe? That seems to be a pretty good research question. And the obvious approach to that, of course, is through design. So how are we going to design the best design course? And I know a lot of people are thinking about that. I think it's absolutely great.
And although that may be seen as a teaching challenge, it is actually one that is a research challenge as well, and will produce research spin-offs.
In a sense, that was behind my question, that was triggered by Claudia's message, comment, was that obviously the Open University, it's a large organization, has certain structures and processes in place, and we have certain expertise on how you design futures, as you say, Jeff, or how you design educational programs, and I honestly was wondering how it's possible this kind of expertise to to be part of the EU fabric more in a more direct way, because at the moment we are just, you know, we don't have much opportunities as a design department, a design school, design group to influence design processes that much. And it would have been better if we could have injected a little bit of our expertise. I'm not saying that we have all the knowledge, but we have certain knowledge and expertise that would have been useful for the university.
Well, it's never too late. Every day is the first day of the rest of our lives. And you know, within the university has just developed a new research strategy over the last few months, and it's done that in its own way. In my view, a more designerly approach might have had a better outcome. But we could still be part of thinking about that and thinking about our institutions, you know, thinking about our teaching structures and our educational structures, you know, creating new things, trying new things. Although the university is very it's like a straitjacket, there still are many things you can do below the radar.
Well, Theo's question is still a good one, in the sense that you're on the fringes of a STEM faculty that doesn't quite understand design, and maybe it doesn't give us the advocacy that we would need on a sort of departmental and faculty level.
Yes, but you know, Claudia, it's a typical tribal thing that the people in earth sciences will say we know nothing about earth science, and the people in biology will say we're totally ignorant of biology. And so it's that challenge of interdisciplinarity is to know our own areas, but also to respect, you know, the rare areas of other people, and to learn how to be diplomatic and get along with people.
Maybe on this general famous last words, we should actually conclude this, since we've kept people for nearly an hour and a half. And unless anybody has got any burning questions or comments at this point.
Well, I just have one kind of summary comment, which is that I think the group has had a wonderful history, a wonderful past, and it's my belief that in research and teaching it's going to have a wonderful future. So I'm very optimistic. I think we're all great. You're all great.
Yeah, and I very much support that attitude, and to see the new people that are now working together here. We've got some really exciting combinations going on, which I think can spur us through into research in the future. Yep, yes, that's right.
Maybe they do design at 100 soon. And then we see what's left, what's our legacy.
Okay, Jeff, Robin, and me will have to get a hard light hologram to be around for the future events. We'll see. Yeah. Jeff, you
what
can
advice do you give your colleagues for design at 100? What do you want them to take as a message from you?
Well, you'll find out about that. Jeff's the one who can arrange the hard light holograms for the future. I look forward to
that. we do our best.
Yes, thanks for that comment, Sam.
You will be there in spirit. Oh.
In some way.
Yeah, something like that.
Go on.
Yeah, you will be there in spirit. Oh.
Yeah, I just noticed in the chat the design writing days and open days and stuff, that these are great initiatives, and it's wonderful to see them.
Yeah. That's part of the new ways of actually getting that synergy going, which we need to find new ways. After all, design group, we should be able to do that. Okay.
I think in that spirit, we should still wish everybody a good night and deeply regret that we can't go to the pub as we would have done under other circumstances.
We could do that in a few weeks' time. We'll sort that out.
Good.
Okay, thanks very much, Claudia, for sharing this evening, and thanks to everybody for your participation and the comments and everything. Great, cheers, and thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, everybody.